Olá, meu nome é Thiago Amparo, sou colunista da Folha de São Paulo e professor da FGV. Essa entrevista faz parte de uma série de comemorações do centenário da Folha de São Paulo, que acontece em fevereiro. Hoje a gente recebe o Ben Smith, que é colunista de mídia do New York Times, jornal americano, e a gente vai falar um pouco sobre o futuro do jornalismo aqui no Brasil e nos Estados Unidos e ao redor do mundo. Ben, thank you very much for taking time to be here. It's an honor to interview you.
Thanks for including me in the Folha anniversary, and congratulations. You look very young for 100 years.
So, Ben, I want to start with what you do at New York Times, because you are a media columnist at New York Times, reflecting critically about the media itself, which is, to be frank, is a position that is not so common in Brazil. We have ombudsman in the main newspapers, but actually some people argue, like one journalist here in Brazil, Patrícia Campos Melo, recently argued in a book that we don't have enough self-criticism in the media. So if you could tell a little bit what's the role and the importance of having this people reflecting, like yourself, reflecting on the media nowadays?
I would put it a little bit differently from Patrizia, not so much that necessarily it's sort of an obligation. It's a great story. I mean, I think that if you cover politics, if you cover technology, if you cover sports, you realize how much power the media has, how much in all of those fields the media plays a really major role, and you really aren't telling the true story of politics if you pretend that the media is off to the side. You're not telling the true story of sports if you don't realize that most of the money, or a huge share of the money, is coming from deals with the media. And technology, all of these technology companies live and die based on the way in which they are covered in the media. And it's true, I think, more now than it was 50 years ago. I think that, we live in kind of this media age in which, the United States, the president was for 4 years was really a media figure, a media entrepreneur, not a real businessman.
You write often about this landscape of conservative media, and in Brazil we have seen that, especially with this discourse of trying to embrace the right or the far right on TV, on the newspapers, and give them spaces to talk about those issues, to strike the narrative that there is no enough space for conservative thought in the media, in the mainstream media or the liberal media. So how do you see the role of this more conservative media, or at least a media that has a specific ideology behind it, in context with the increase of the right in countries like Brazil or United States?
I mean, I think there are two things happening. One is that social media and the sort of new right-wing populism that lives so much on social media have created a new wave of right-wing outlets that, aren't really doing journalism. They're doing propaganda, and they're trying to kind of help the leader however they can, and attack his opponents, that are, I think, a real social, like a problem for societies that are trying to, settle on facts and figure out what's going on. In the U.S., though, Fox News is something different. It's a huge platform. It's the most watched cable news channel in the country, has been for years. We all love to write about what's new and these kind of weird new things and these new websites and what's happening on Facebook and these new television networks that are even crazier than Fox and have sort of grown up to challenge it from the right. But ultimately, Fox is, central to the reason that Americans have this very skewed view about reality, particularly about the election, Donald Trump, is primarily because of Fox. And I think it's almost boring to talk about because it's so obvious, but it is really a very central feature of American politics.
The U.S. just went through a very difficult electoral process, that for us international observers looked like that never ending. And I want you to hear your thoughts about what's the role of the media played in the American elections this time, and whether you have a criticism or not of how it went.
I mean, there's lots of minor criticisms, but actually, I think the most important thing was the coverage of the election itself, not of the campaigning, but of the voting. And I think the media actually did a pretty decent job of kind of holding the line and not really allowing these crazy theories about voter fraud to, you know, Trump was able to spread them to his people through his media outlets, but I think that they were such total nonsense. And I think it was really important that the mainstream media and the television told the true story of the election and really didn't give any space and any oxygen to that. I mean, the exception that for a minute, for about a week, Fox News also was very responsible, and then they could feel that their audience wanted them to lie, and so they started lying again.
Twitter just suspended President Trump account. How do you see this, the responsibility of these platforms in regulating or not the speech that is delivered inside of those media platforms?
I mean, it's extraordinary. I think if you had any doubt about how much power these platforms had, banning Trump has silenced him. I mean, he's gone. You know, it's like amazing. It's crazy how much power that had. I think more than I expected, actually. He doesn't seem to really have other outlets or have any other way to, manipulate the conversation or participate in the conversation. Also, I don't think anyone is comfortable, including the platforms, that with just the CEO of some company making a decision. There are some regulatory reforms, that could make them liable, maybe not for what is said, but for what is distributed and amplified at a huge level. But I do think the question of, who makes these decisions, right? Is it just the executives of the company? Is it a government official? Facebook has set up a Facebook oversight board that is sort of meant to be a kind of global Facebook Supreme Court. That is kind of an interesting idea, I think, because I think even when you talk about regulation, usually what these European governments and others are saying is not that some government official will decide what is okay. It's that they will force the companies to have some kind of clear process. And I think that's probably the best outcome, is that there is a kind of both transparency in terms of what is going viral on the platforms and why, and then some kind of semi-independent body that is making decisions around content. But I don't know. It's a very hard problem.
And I want to connect that with a phenomenon that we are seeing more and more. This idea of we could say personalized journalism, in the sense that several journalists, personally, they have more followers on Twitter than media outlets. Do you see this as a phenomenon that is increased because of the media, because of the social media, or is it good, or is it something that you should pay attention to, the power that individual journalists have in telling their stories directly, not necessarily from a newsroom? Does it change something in the journalist when you have that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the biggest change in the sort of culture of journalism is this, the sense that it becomes sort of a talent business. I mean, I think, sport, like places, things like sports, like movies, the stars make 100 times as much money as the other workers. And they do that. They're able to do that because they bring that much more value. And I think that, in journalism for a long time, it had been basically anonymous or very close to anonymous. And I think the rise of social media, but also, there's a sort of celebrity culture in general, I think, around with television as well, that has, kind of turned journalists into stars, given them both opportunities to go out on their own and just make money, having their own publication, but also given them kind of leverage with their employer and weakened the employer in relationship to the employee. I think there's also the possibility for that to create a lot of tension and kind of inequality inside the organization, where stars kind of know their value and and can demand more money and more resources and more freedom, and people who just come there and work and do a good job are valued less. And I think that really can become a real problem. I think one of the big challenges in the future for people trying to create news organizations is going to be balancing those two things.
we have a saying in Brazil in the newspapers saying that, well, when the media is the story, probably it's something is going on, something wrong is going on. And we live in I would say probably in a very abnormal times. I don't know what normal means, but we live in a very strange times, especially when you look at the presidency of Trump, Donald Trump, or Bolsonaro here in Brazil. And you have an article in September that you wrote, and I found very interesting, that you said the journalists aren't the enemy of the people, but they are not your friends. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit about that, about the role of journalism in these very strange times that we are living in, with anti-democratic forces in power in several countries around the world, and what's the role of journalism in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, I'd say that people like you and me who have kind of grown up in democratic countries and had our careers in journalism in open societies probably have a lot to learn from people who have spent their careers sort of reckoning with really anti-democratic forces that are, on the rise in Brazil now and in the US now. But I find it kind of difficult. Like, I don't think most American journalists, or that I really know how to deal with, a political movement that positions itself against facts and against science and against journalism specifically. But in the U.S., what I was writing about was, I think for a lot of liberals who oppose Donald Trump, people who read the New York Times, who watch MSNBC, the cable network, or CNN, I think they came to really see us as their allies in this fight against Donald Trump. And there's elements of that that are true, right? I mean, he was lying and we were trying to correct him, but but this is also a political movement that has its own political leaders who also aren't always connected to the facts or to reality and have their own agendas. And I think it's really important for the media not to become part of that movement.
You mentioned in one article recently about the Capitol and the invasion of the Capitol in the United States, of the U.S. Congress. You mentioned that you were wondering how the media was portraying, or how the media should portray this kind of invasion, because on one side you can say, well, it's a political party responding to its constituencies and should be covered as such, talking about the Republican Party, or should reporters spend most of the time treating the House minority as a toxic, anti-democratic tactic? And in the US, you have a whole discussion about whether you qualify certain things as a lie or not. So how do you see these choices of the media in framing the issues and bringing several sides to a certain story?
I mean, these are difficult issues. I think the American media for a long time was in this kind of lazy pattern of saying, well, someone says the sky is blue, someone says the sky is not blue. We'll just print both sides of that. I think it has been a while since that was the problem. I mean, I think Trump, in a way, forced everyone to reckon with the fact that he was just lying and sort of challenging us to see whether to call him a liar. And then using the fact that we called him a liar to say to his base, see, they hate me, they hate you. I mean, it was a trap in a way. It's complicated politics, I think. It's not so simple as you can use these magic words like lie and racist, and then suddenly he will go away. And in fact, I think that, the media did over the period of the Trump years shift toward much blunter language about Trump. I'm not sure it changed anyone's mind. Like, I don't really see any evidence that it mattered. It maybe made journalists feel better. It made the people who already hated Trump feel better served by journalists, but I'm not sure anyone changed their mind. So I think sometimes we overestimate our own power. But yeah, and I think the question of how do we treat the 130 some legislators who voted to invalidate the election is really interesting. I mean, it's hard because, at some point that story will get old, and, maybe they will be voting with Biden to help him pass his infrastructure bill. And, how they do have a formal role in the political system, but they've also attacked that system. And I think figuring out how to balance that is complicated.
we don't have research about that, but what the sense is that people are connecting ideology in an ideological way to certain newspapers. So saying that, well, this is more opposition newspaper, so I'm going to subscribe. And in the New York Times, as far as I understood, you also had a boom or like increase of the subscriptions during Trump presidency. And so how do you see this increase of subscribers and whether this affects or not the journalists that and kind of the direction of the journalists, because, well, that's how most of the newspapers nowadays survive financially.
I mean, I think it will have a big effect. I think, at the New York Times, like at Folha, there is a culture internally that says that we're always adversarial. And I think you'll see the Times do very tough reporting on Joe Biden, partly to kind of show that. But also, right, there is this kind of gravitational pull from subscribers that I think over the long term will turn the paper into something that is more connected to this audience that's probably more partisan. I mean, there's also the fact that our right wing has become more extreme and sort of rejects norms and institutions and facts and the idea of journalism. And so, that is that's a big force also. So I don't know if it's good for journalism or bad for journalism. There's always been more different kinds of it's always been a very kind of messy, complicated business with lots of different people doing lots of different kinds of work. And I assume it'll just keep changing. I don't know.
What do you see the future of media, after Trump? And especially because, of course, there are several ways to answer this, but I think that the conspiracy theories against media are not going to end anytime soon. So what do you, at New York Times, but also more generally, if you will, what's the future of media in this time after Trump presidency?
I mean, I think a lot of the trends that Trump sort of came with are going to continue. The sort of anger and divisiveness of politics, and also the increasing ability of small news operations, small organizations to kind of directly reach the people most connected to them, all over the political and cultural world, which often is great, but also, and I think it's complicated. But I think basically the same trends that toward more division and toward a kind of economics that is based around subscription and direct connection to consumers, those will continue. I don't think Trump really does away with that. I think the question of, is the sort of social media age kind of coming to an end in some ways? Is social media fading? Does the departure of Trump from Twitter, it does feel like the beginning of the end of something.